That's very nice welcome. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Just a little explanation of how this is going to work out. We're going to have about half an hour in which I'll talk to Stephen about the adaptation of The Hippopotamus. Then at 9:10, we have a satellite link up to, I think it's 120 cinemas around the country. We'll at that point... Yes, I think that does deserve a round of applause. Yes, that's...
Name 120 cities and towns.
Yes, exactly. At about 9:05, we're going to bring on the filmmakers, the sort of key players in the film itself, and then at 10:00 we'll go live to them, and then we will take some questions from the audience toward the end. Bear in mind that because it's, as I said, a satellite link up to several different cinemas, language should be moderated at all times since it will be broadcast.
Fuck. Cheap and obvious.
Yeah, cheap, but still got a laugh.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. So, Stephen, let's begin by the novel, which has been around for a while, has just now finally become a film. Firstly, for those who may not be completely au fait with it, the subject of the novel is?
Well, it's the hero is, I suppose, the hippopotamus of the title. He's a critic, an over-the-hill poet and critic who once was a promising, you know, angry young man in the 50s and 60s.
Yes.
Kind of was the future of British poetry. And no one can make their money from being a poet. He's a theatre critic, but he drinks too much, and he's loud, and he's rude, and he's contemptuous. And when we first meet him, he's being thrown out of a play where he's just stood up and shouted at the action, because have you ever had that feeling when you want to stand up and shout, "Don't believe a word of it, fraud," you know? Yes. And he did it, and of course he's thrown out and he's fired, and he gets this request from a goddaughter of his to investigate what seems to be some kind of miraculous goings-on in a country house. So it's a mixture of a kind of weird country house detective story in which he's the detective, and an investigation of what appears to be the paranormal.
Okay. Now, because obviously people here won't have seen the film because it's got a preview tonight and then it opens on Friday, the cinemas around the country, they are watching it. We're going to show a few clips just so that you can kind of get a sense of the film. To start with, the most sensible thing would be to show you the trailer, because that sort of gives you a general overview. So here is the trailer for The Hippopotamus.
Hey.
I published 5 collections of poetry in 8 years, but I haven't written a poem since 1987. These days, I turn whiskey into journalism.
Get off the stage!
Still got it.
You're fired.
Pity the poor poet.
My doctor tells me I have 3 months to live.
That's a smeller.
Do you believe in miracles? Something happened to me at Swafford Hall. I want you to go there and find the truth. I'd pay you handsomely.
I was thrust into my worst nightmare.
Hello, boys.
Uncle Edward! Ted.
You're looking younger. Lost some of that fat. Tell me why you're really here.
Jane told me there were miracles which she wanted me to investigate.
The only thing you've ever got to the bottom of is a whiskey bottle.
If you're here, Rebecca, who's ruling over Narnia?
You need to keep your eyes open and see what needs to be seen.
2 miracles.
I don't believe in miracles.
He's too jaded to feel wonder.
Maybe I should sacrifice my every standard of wit and reason and throw my lot in with this imbecile cult.
Just open your heart.
What if I don't want to?
You must.
Poor, pompous hippopotamus.
The things I do for money.
There you go.
I've always had this strict rule that if a film is to be rightly considered a comedy, it has to make you laugh 6 times.
Yes.
There were at least 3 in the course of the trailer, so it has clearly succeeded. So now, just in terms of the adaptation, the book is there's a lot of letters in it. It's epistolary. There's stuff that you couldn't do for the screen. So how has that been transferred to the screen? I know instantly you didn't.
Yes, very important to say that. You know, when you write a book, or at least speaking for myself, you put a whole amount of yourself in it, and then you want to say goodbye to it. You never want to see it again. I've never read any of my books back since they've been published.
You don't take them off the shelf and just...
No, I don't.
No, I mean, that's a genuine question. You don't...
No, I really don't. Maybe one day, I don't know, when I get into my 60s, no, hang on, I'm going to be 60 in August. So maybe in August I will pluck them down and read them and go, well, that's awfully good. Oh, I like that. But it's something I did, and I'm, you know, I was proud of it at the time, I guess, or at least felt that was what I wanted to do. But when people have said, can I make it a play or can I make it a film or something, I've said, yes, by all means, but I won't be involved. I won't be the one to do the adaptation. And I'm thrilled if anybody else wants to do it. And when John and Jay, the team behind this, said they wanted to do it, I was delighted. And they did send me the screenplay, and I thought it was terrific. But I said, you know, don't ask me to comment on it. I want it to be yours. And it is theirs. You know, they've made it their own entirely.
So literally the last time that you were directly involved with the book presumably was when you did the audio books, which you would have read the whole thing out, and then that was it.
That was it. I haven't looked at it since.
Okay, so in that case, was there any sense of trepidation or worry that the finished product will be so different or, you know, unrecognisable, or do you think it's close to the book?
From my memory of the book, it is close to the book. I mean, I recognise some of the dialogue and the story, but I also, you know, one of the things is a novel is made of words and nothing else. You pick it up, you hold it in your hands, it is just words. There they are on the page. A film is made of more than that. Yes, the screenplay is made of words, but the movie you watch is made of all kinds of other things. Colours, pictures, designs, voices, music, all kinds of other elements come together to make a film. And that's a corporate enterprise, which is so different from writing a book, which is a lonely, special kind of thing you do, a contract you have with your reader. But a film, I adore films, and I wish I were better at writing screenplays. As it is, I find them agony, absolute agony.
But you do have, you know, screenplay writing experience, and you've done script doctoring.
I have, yeah.
Some of it acknowledged, some of it uncredited.
Yeah, I remember, and this to me sums up the difference between film writing, you know, writing novels and writing movies. The great Billy Wilder doing the Schlendorf interviews, the German director interviewed him. And he was talking about working with Marlene Dietrich and so on. He said, oh, I have to tell you, when I did Witness for the Prosecution, he did this wonderful movie of Witness for the Prosecution with Tyrone Power and Charles Lawton and Marlene. And it's based on an Agatha Christie play. And he said, you know, Agatha Christie, the stale dialogue, terrible characters, flat art, you know. He said, but it took me and Izzy Diamond half an afternoon to write good dialogue and good characters. But she plotted like an angel. We could have worked for 10 years, never come up with this plot. Raymond Chandler, he's fantastic dialogue, brilliant characters, verkackte plots. He said, and you have to understand, in the film business, there are 1,000 Raymond Chandlers for every one Agatha Christie. And that's a surprising thing to hear, because we think of Agatha Christie, oh, well, she. But it's the plotting, it's the structure, it's which scene, when it ends, what the next scene is, that rhythm, that architecture, it's so difficult to do for me. You know, you can make funny lines and characters, but in a novel, it's all words, so you paper over the structural flaws with language.
Is there part of you that loves the control of a novel? I mean, when you're writing a novel, it's you, the paper, the audience, that's it. There is no intermediary. So is there part of you that loves that, as opposed to, when you're saying with film, there are all these different things. Film is obviously a collaborative medium. And you do seem to like the control of it's just you and the page.
I do. I mean, I like both, but where I like being in part of a team is as an actor rather than as a writer. So if I'm writing, I like to be absolutely on my own. I get up at 5 in the morning and I write till 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and that's the way I write, and it's completely private. But I'm always thinking when it's not going well, I could be on a film set or a TV set. I could, you know, you have marks on the floor telling you where to stand, people bringing you coffee and calling you sir, which they literally do, and saying, you know, you can go back to your caravan for 4 hours now while we light it. You sit there and you watch some DVDs, you know. And some of the trailers even have jacuzzis in them. I mean, you're treated like a god. But, and so there you are alone writing, thinking, oh God, I could be an actor. Then, of course, when you're on a film set, it's 6 in the morning and it's miserable and cold and you've got to wait around and you think, I could be in my pajamas writing. So it's kind of, I think all of us have two sides to us, the one that wants to be alone and in control of our universe, and the one that wants to be part of a team.
We need to broach the subject of critics. The central character in your novel and indeed in the film is somebody who is a poet whose inspiration has dried up. They've hit the bottle, they have become embittered. There's somebody who has lost the love of what they're doing, and they have become, therefore, a critic. Now, I have quoted you as having said this before, but I'll say it to you again because it's worth repeating. You once wrote, imagine at the end of your life you turn up at the gates of heaven and St. Peter says, what did you do with your life? And you say, I criticised other people's work. And you said, it's no profession, is it? You have been very withering about critics in the past.
Yeah.
And you have now portrayed somebody who is a critic for all the wrong reasons because their own inspiration has dried up. Yeah. Have you mellowed?
I have. I've mellowed. I've mellowed enormously in exactly the same way that I used to think that the enemy of our society was what they call, I believe, the dead wood media, newspapers. And if only newspapers could be brought down, they're trying to tell us what to think. They're awful, they're terrible, they're the enemy of everything. Now, of course, I think, please save newspapers. The last bastion of freedom and responsibility and truth-telling is in our journalists. So I have changed enormously. And I, you know, especially now that everybody's a critic, you know, online, social media and so on, I do think that a good, informed critic, a seasoned critic, someone who knows and understands and loves the world that they're criticizing is a very valuable thing to have. So I'm...
Nicely saved.
Yeah. I'm very ashamed of my younger absurdities.
Shall we enjoy the scene in which the critic in The Hippopotamus goes into meltdown, just so we can see how your newfound respect for critics has manifested itself in the world? Let's enjoy this.
Patricians, patrons of my right, defend the justice of my cause with arms. And countrymen, and my loving followers.
Basanius, Caesar's son, were gracious in the eyes of royal Rome. Take then this passage to the capital.
Complete and utter
suffer
crap.
not dishonor to approach the
You're not defending this fecal matter, are you?
to justice, continence, and nobility.
Princes that strive by factions and by friends.
Oh, fuck off.
Would you keep your opinions to yourself?
That's rather against the grain being a critic, doesn't it?
Know that the people of Rome for whom we stand a special party have
By common voice.
have by common voice in election for the Roman empery chosen
Right, that's it.
Andronicus, surnamed Pius.
Get off the stage and find new representation.
Is this part of the performance?
On the contrary, madam, this is an intervention.
Where is the man responsible for this theatrical ordeal? Where is Matthew Lake?
Throw him out!
Not me, madam. It is the director who should be ejected, then tarred and feathered for inflicting such loose-stooled effluent upon the paying public.
Say that again.
Loose-stooled effluent.
Oh, do you need the line again? Still got it.
Get your fucking hands off me! I haven't seen such a load of shit on the stage since Coprophilia the musical. Get off me! Get off! You should be ashamed of yourselves.
I am definitely going to be using the phrase loose-stooled in a review in the very near future. But the thing that's lovely about that scene is actually we are completely on his side, because it is an appalling production.
It is.
And we totally support his right to stand up
is.
and shout at it.
Exactly. If that kind of arse gravy is presented to you, then you have no other option than to call it out.
One of the things about the dialogue in the film, as you just demonstrated, you've always had a fantastic turn of phrase. You use obscenity in a beautiful way, and no, you do. And there are wonderful lines that are given to the central character that I can hear you saying. How much of you is in Ted?
More than I had probably remembered when I saw the film a few months ago first. I had, in my mind, I had imagined that I'd based the character on a playwright I knew well and had worked with, Simon Gray, who was a wonderful old drunk and very funny and quite embittered sometimes. He wrote those wonderful smoking diaries, about it, in which you'd get into rows with cab drivers about smoking. I mean, it was hilarious and sad and funny. And so I thought that's who it was. It was a compendium of Kingsley Amis and John Osborne and Simon Gray, and was nothing to do with me. But when I looked at the film, then I thought, gosh, I see myself in that. It's a very strange thing. It's a bit like how, Oscar Wilde said everyone becomes like their mother in their end. That's their tragedy, I realised I'd become like this character.
But you're not embittered.
No, I'm not embittered.
And I know that you have had times in which you have, had a very frosty relationship with the press. You've had times when you've had a very sort of positive relationship with them. But you're not embittered. Actually, you are hugely positive about the world, aren't you?
Yes, I think I am actually. But I do have. Like anybody, I can shout at a television.
Do you do that?
I shout at the television, but not at the stage.
Okay, fine.
So in that sense, I'm much more cowardly than Ted.
Yeah. I have stood up and shouted at a film.
You have in Cannes?
Yes, in Cannes. I got thrown out of Cannes because very proud of it, incidentally. Thank you, yes. It was the press screening of Lars von Trier's The Idiots, which I know you feel the same way as I do.
It's particularly annoying because one admires, Gilbert Grape and so many great movies.
The Idiots is a terrible, terrible film.
Is, yeah.
And there's a moment in The Idiots in which it suddenly, for no apparently good reason, has a section of hardcore in it, which I have no problem with. But there was this round of critical applause. People going, oh, bravo, very brave. And I thought, I've had enough of this. So I stood up and I shouted in very bad French, il est merde. Il est le plus grand merde dans le monde entire. And then, using the language of modern dance, the security guards escorted me off the premises, and that was the end of that.
Along the croisette.
Yeah. So one of the other subjects of the novel and the film is to do with the miraculous in the world. And you have talked at great length about your feelings about divinity and all the rest of it. Explain to us the setup of the miracle that may or may not be involved in the story.
Well, various people have gone to this country house and they've felt that they have been cured of some problem they've had. His goddaughter in particular feels that she's actually been cured of leukemia. Yeah. And that one of the sons of the family there, the father Matthew Modine and the mother Fiona Shaw, that he has some extraordinary power, and the boy himself seems to think it. And everybody seems to think it, but Ted is extremely doubtful. And, you know, without preaching in the novel, I wanted to show that poetry comes from an absolute engagement with matter, with the substance of things. You know, a poet is incredibly obsessed with the, you know, the glassness of glass, the wateriness of water, and trying to penetrate it with language. They're not looking up at the heavens and asking for some ethereal gift. And he says at one point in the book, all I know is if there is gold, the only way to get it is to scratch and break your skin in a mine and get the ore, and then to blister your bones and your skin in a furnace and melt it, and then there will be gold. It does exist, but I absolutely know that an angel doesn't hand it down to you from heaven. And that is the truth. There are beautiful and miraculous things in the world, but they all come from an engagement with the world, a reality, not a stepping away from it and a wishing and a hugging. And if only this were true, then things will grow up. And sorry. And I'm so sorry. Oh dear, I lost my temper. That wasn't. Ignore me. And so that's channeling my inner Ted, I fear.
Very good. So you were saying about the nature of poetry and...
Exactly. So, you know, so that's the point, is she offers him money to find it out. She knows he's an intelligent fellow and that he, you know, really is bright, but he is doubtful, and I hope the audience is doubtful too, that, you know, think that Ted is just a cynic. He's just a ridiculous cynic. The title of the book actually comes from a T.S. Eliot poem called The Hippopotamus. The broad-backed hippopotamus sits on his belly in the mud. Although he seems so firm to us, he's merely flesh and blood. And that's the point. That's all they are. And in fact, what Eliot's writing about, in his particular case, is the Church of England, which he became a great... and the poem ends with the picture of the hippopotamus being lifted up to heaven by angels because he was in the mud. And he's comparing the Church of England to the Catholic Church, which Eliot didn't like so much. But that's irrelevant. What I liked was this image of something that is in the mud is kind of holier and purer than something that's in the air.
We have a clip, in fact, that now would be a sensible time to show it because it touches on exactly this. It's the clip in the boat with Ted and his godson. Do you want to just explain to people where we are when they're about to have this conversation about what you've been talking about?
If I can remember where we are. His godson, David, is the one that seems to have some strange, mysterious powers to help people and to cure them. And he's a very bright boy who wants to be a poet and is very proud of the fact that this famous poet, Ted Wallace, is his godfather, and he wants to read him his poetry and tell him about his inner life. And Ted is, of course, oh, Christ, all I want is a glass of whiskey, not to have some child wanking away with his poetry. Christ. So there's this kind of deep embarrassment. He's trying to be tactful to the boy.
Excellent. Let's have a look. Thank you.
Child of trees and son of earth, lies in wait for his rebirth. Beneath the trees, he hides alone beneath your feet. This boy unknown lies in his cradle, hidden from sight, buried like seed, his seed so white. He gives himself the kiss of peace, his seed doth sprout with sweet release. Well, fuck me. Gosh.
I'd like you to keep it.
Lovely.
Has Mummy spoken to you about me?
Why do you ask that?
I worry her. I can see it in her eyes.
Mothers worry, it's in their job description.
Well, I worry her more than Simon.
Simon doesn't treat strangers to nuggets of penile data. He's safe.
Meaning I'm unsafe.
I should bloody well hope so. I'm not having a godson of mine running around the place being anything other than wild and dangerous.
Why are people embarrassed about sexual things?
I'm not.
In my opinion, people are more embarrassed about love than sex.
What makes you think that?
They never talk about it.
It's all anyone ever talks about. Love, love, love. Love is all you need. Love makes the world go round. 90% of the world's poetry is about love.
With swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle dim, ye fathers forth, whose beauty is past change. Praise him.
Oh, God. Of course you like Hopkins.
The greats know that poetry is how we allow nature to speak to us. Wordsworth?
No, you chump. My heart leaps up. On my couch, I lie. I wandered lonely as a cloud. He's an egomaniacal onanist.
Wordsworth did not masturbate.
He's a fucking tea towel writer. Look, young pup, my heart rejoices that you want to be a poet, but I bet you can't name a profession with less use, less chance, less point, less status, and fewer prospects.
Sewage engineer.
Ah, all right. Scenario 1. All the poets in England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland go on strike. Impact, nil. Misery, nil. 14 years before anyone even notices. Scenario 2. All the sewage engineers in London alone go on strike. Impact, turds and tampons flopping out of your tap, scum and ooze where'er you walk. Misery, hardship, newsworthiness, high.
You do still believe in poetry, its power to change the world. You do still care.
Oh, Christ, not you as well. Look, of course I do. It's just hard work. You want gold, you break your back down a mine. It doesn't just float from the sky in gleaming bars. All right?
What's really nice about that clip is actually the young man is saying some things that you do believe in. So it's not just a simple identification.
No, it's much more of a tennis match than just a, bouncing against a wall, an idea, isn't it? No, you believe, you feel for both of them, I think.
You said earlier on that, you now feel that what you want to do is to save journalism, that things have changed in your opinion, and the world is very, very, very different now to the way anybody could have imagined a few years ago. Do you think that the way in which technology has moved on as fast as it had, you were an early embracer, you were somebody who was, really at the very cutting edge of that, but you do seem to now have an affection for still believing in things, for old values.
Yes. I tell you what it is, I was talking about this yesterday. I did embrace the technology and the original technology, and then the networking, the World Wide Web, and then the arrival of social media and Twitter and so on. And I thought, people are going to connect with each other and learn things, and there's an availability of culture and the written word and of art and open art galleries 24 hours a day, and access to knowledge and understanding, and borders and barriers and boundaries will melt and dissolve, and tribalism and hatred and misunderstanding will be got rid of, and the world will be a wonderful and marvelous place. And yes, what a naive, what an idiot. I don't know when it was I realized that far from that being the case, it almost seemed the opposite was the case. But it's not that I no longer believe in this technology. Of course, it's still magnificent what access we have to knowledge and what access we have to each other, and people with rare diseases or rare, hobbies of cosplay or game playing or whatever it may be, can be in touch with each other across the world and reach out and hug each other, as it were, virtually. That's all wonderful, but it's also true that hatred and tribalism and nativism have flourished as well, and that the enemies of that kind of connectedness have embraced the technology perhaps with more savvy skill than we feeble hand-wringing liberals and arty types. Maybe that's true, but I still believe in it, but I also am thrilled that vinyl and, you know, the analog world is having a resurgence.
A huge resurgence.
And I really believe in that, and I love it. And I know that if I were a 15-year-old, like David, say, in the film, I would actually, at school, I would look at people in the playground who were on Instagram and Snapchat, and I'd go, how lame. How pathetic. Look at them all. We're all looking at these pictures of, I don't know, some American reality star or some, you know, what are they doing? And I would find maybe on eBay originally, using the internet, I would find a duplicator. And we'd write a magazine using a stencil, rolling it out, and there'd only be 30 copies. Yeah. And we'd, you know, we'd do it on blue paper so it couldn't be easily, you know, photocopied, and it couldn't be scanned. I would say to you know, we have a group of friends and say, we're not allowed to have phones, you know? And I had actually, I got so far as even thinking I'd be at school and the, you know, and the teacher would say, okay, I need the essays in my inbox by 6 this evening. I'd go, so what's your address, sir? And he'd go, well, you know what it is, it's at thisschool.com. Go, no, where do you live? Where I live is none of your business. Well, how do I deliver my essay to you? I've just told you I need it in my inbox. But I mean your letterbox where you live. No, send me an email. Oh, I don't have email, sir. You don't have one? Oh, your parents too poor to afford? No, my parents have got it. I haven't. Well, write it and then email it. No, I don't have a computer. Well, I'm going to write it out and I'm going to deliver it to you. And they'll go, well, you can't do that. I said, well, in that case, I won't write the essay.
Yep.
That'd be fantastic. You just live off the grid in a way that used real stuff. And I would love that, wouldn't you? Wouldn't that be the coolest thing?
No.
Because everyone would just be thinking oh, I just love it.
But what's strange is that you embrace and embody completely contradictory
yes.
and you do them both with the enthusiasm of the other. And whatever you say, at the moment you're saying it, like 3 minutes ago, you were explaining this utopian vision of the world, and I believed it until you got to the punchline of the sentence. Then you said, and then it's all not true. See, the thing is, I think that what's underneath it all, whether it's that you're writing a book or whether you're talking about the internet, whether you're talking about old analog, what it is that the poetry is that in the moment of saying something, you love language enough to make it sound real.
Oh,
I think
wow.
that's what it is.
Wow. Do you know, it's very extraordinary because I just changed my, you know that thing, your Twitter biog, where you sort of put something under your picture.
Yes.
And I just changed it to my saying, which is a sort of adaptation of an Ian Forster saying, which is, how can I tell you what I think until I've heard what I'm going to say? Yeah. And that is the motto by which I live. I don't actually think. I don't know what I'm going to say until I've said it. And when I'm saying it, I shape it and I glory in it, like a potter throwing a thing. I'm thinking, wow, what's this thing I'm making with words as I speak? And I'm doing it now, and I have no idea how this sentence is going to end. And it may end with me using the word badminton. Where did that come from, you see? And it's thrilling. And I suppose one of my favourite moments is in the letter Oscar Wilde wrote to Bosie, where he says to Lord Alfred Douglas, he says, you know, you failed your degree, and that's absolutely fine. Many great minds have not got a degree. But what I find very hard to forgive is that you never acquired what used to be called the Oxford manner, which I take to mean the ability to play gracefully with ideas. And I think that's a marvellous thing to hold as an ideal and as an ambition, the ability to play gracefully with ideas. Gracefully is very important because what upsets us with social media is the trolling and everything is how graceless it is.
Yes.
But to play gracefully with ideas is the way things get improved, and that's incredibly important, I think.
We're going to bring the filmmakers on in just a minute because we are going live to 120 cinemas in 6 minutes. So I'm looking at this clock. It's like,
well done.
It's like doing Eurovision. It's fantastic. Just a sort of last word from you about the book. You say you haven't gone back and read the book recently. Yeah. And now that the film has come out, does a part of you feel like going back and reading your original novel to see how it stands up?
I think I will. And of course, the wonderful thing is now, when I see Ted, I will see Roger Allam, because I think his performance is absolutely magical.
Yes.
I mean, truly brilliant. You'll see him in a second, and I know you'll agree if you see the film, and you probably can already see from the clips how wonderful he is, and how wonderful the whole cast is, and what a great job John Jenks has done in directing it. And so I feel just so grateful, because now I have these real solid pictures and voices to hear if I do read it again. So that's thrilling.
Okay, so look, let's welcome to the stage the director, John Jenks, Roger Allam, who we've just seen in those clips, and Blanche McIntyre, who's the co-writer of The Hippopotamus.
And Blanche, indeed. Hey, thank you, John. You're a glorious man. And Blanche.
I'm going to just...
Oh, yeah.
Just grab it.
All right.
Okay, so look, we've basically got 5 minutes before the satellite link goes up. So this is the point at which you can say whatever you want, and it's not going to be broadcast around the world. You've all just been listening to Stephen's version of The Hippopotamus. John, how much does that tally with your version of The Hippopotamus?
Oh, me first.
You're the director, that's how it works.
Yeah, well, writer, can you write me some lines so I can say them now and actually get Roger to say them? No. It was such a energy of so many inputs to get The Hippopotamus to where it is now.
Because you wanted to do it for ages.
Yeah, no, it took us about 6 years to write the script, and then it took us 3 years to finance it, and then it took us 2 years to get it together, and then it's taken us a year now to get it out because our distributor went bankrupt and all that kind of stuff. And no one wanted to finance a film in which a 16-year-old boy thinks he has magic semen for some reason. I remember going to meetings.
The wrong people wanted to finance.
But sorry, what was the...
How faithful do you think the film is to the book? I mean, obviously there are great differences, and there are writing differences, which we'll talk about. The reason I'm not going to bring that up, we're going to talk about them in 4 minutes' time when we're connected around the world. How close do you think the book is to the film?
I think the film is very true to the spirit of the book. I mean, really, we changed lots. I wanted actually to play a game of whose lines are they anyway? Sort of show scenes and have Stephen guess and remember if they were his or Blanche's. But the spirit of the film, I think, is very true to the book. Yeah. And that was the spirit that, got me and I was always going to stick to.
What was it that you loved about the book so much? Because it was like you said that's the best part of a decade that you've been trying to do this. Why particularly that book?
Because I think kindness is the greatest underestimated and undeveloped kind of thing in culture. We've given up on kindness because just being kind doesn't get you very far. You give up on... if you're just kind, you don't actually get very far. But if you're not kind... we haven't really investigated what it doesn't mean to be unkind to people and not have a sort of kindness. And Ted's journey for me is into the importance of treating people. He's always right.
And he recognizes a character in the household who is exactly that kind, whom you haven't seen yet, if all you've seen is those. And that's an important part, isn't it?
Yeah,
that character.
And he finally realizes that he can get this truth. If you can tell truth, it's not actually that important. Getting it in a way that people can listen to it, and the only way to do that is through kindness. And I wanted to tell, that was the fundamental thing that really drove me to it. I can relate to Ted's character, and I can relate to David's character in certain ways, but that sort of importance of kindness was...
And is that what made you think, okay, he can actually do a good job of it because he's actually got the essence of what that story is about through that?
Absolutely. When I saw the first, the letters you'd written and what you'd done together, I did think that was the point. You absolutely got it. You weren't just coasting on the idea that it had rude scenes in it or, kind of rather gross comic ideas that, but you saw the point of them. And I wouldn't say it's a serious novel, but that point that you made is, what it's about and what makes sense of all the apparent oddities that go on. Yeah. And you clearly got it. I was very touched.
And then the other thing I saw in the novel was that it had this great detective plot. For me, I think you need a plot like that in a film in order to drive it and to keep it going. And because we could, link everything around that plot, we'd have something that would drive everything through and would have this sort of romp story that would keep everyone engaged.
Yeah.
So it was having that fun and the... Yeah.
I'm going to jump in and interrupt you. We're going to go live in about 8 seconds. I want you to tell the punchline of a joke and everybody to laugh so that everyone around the world think they missed it.
Without even using custard. I don't know. Amazing. What can you say?
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, here at Hay and also at cinemas around the country. The people in the cinemas around the country have just finished watching The Hippopotamus. Here we've seen some clips. Everybody wants to say hello. John Jenks, the director of The Hippopotamus. Blanche McIntyre, the co-writer of The Hippopotamus. And Roger Allen, the star of Hippopotamus. Roger, let's begin with you. The character that you play in the film is extremely embittered, and when we first meet him, fantastically drunk and enraged, and is a critic. Tell me about that.
It's hell to research, of course. But I have to say, I mean, when we did that scene at the beginning of the film, which is Ted watching an appalling production of Titus Andronicus, I have been in an appalling Andronicus, and so it was very easy, in a sense, to fit, because all the time a lot of us were in that production, we felt like Ted in our response to it. And I've often sat in the theatre, and I think we've talked about this. I mean, I think the difference, the fundamental difference between a theatre critic and a film critic is that a film critic, you don't have to be in the room with the live people, you know, other than the rest of the audience, of course. But also, you don't have to see the same play maybe 10 times in a year if it suddenly becomes fashionable. And so, you know, you can get... If I had to go to the theatre, I don't know, 4 or 5 times a week, and I only quite liked one thing, and only really liked one thing every 3 months, I think I would become deeply and profoundly embittered. And so that just... that just took a bit of, you know, I just compiled in my head all the terrible productions of plays that I've seen or been in, and you know, access that.
It's so true, isn't it? People forget that actors can often be in hell in a play. They don't always support the play they're in. There's a wonderful story about Ralph Richardson, who suddenly stopped a play he was in and said, "Excuse me, is there a doctor in the house?" and someone stood and said, "Oh, doctor, isn't this an awful play?" Fabulous moment.
So did you, you know, in research, you joked about saying it's a hell to research, but did you base your character, I mean, obviously on the script and on what's there in Stephen's book, but did you base it on anyone that you knew?
No, not especially, no. I mean, I'd met Stephen, and he'd mentioned Simon Gray, and I'd thought about George Melly and those kind of Soho characters of a time long gone now, really. But, you know, when you start to try and say the words, it's like Stephen was talking about earlier. You only really discover what you mean when you start the big adventure of the beginning of a sentence, you know, and by the time you get to the end of it, you might have said something coherent. But...
and you just did that very well.
I was just trying to prove a point, you know. So, in a sense, when you start saying those words, that's an enormous part of the character, really. When you just start, you know, because he is extremely verbose and loquacious, yes, and loquacious, and has that facility, and also very witty. So, you know, you start saying those words, and that gives you a great deal to work with, you know.
Stephen, you were very praising of Roger's performance, but when you were writing the novel, I mean, so much of it does read as if you could read it out loud. I mean, there are letters, but it is almost written to be read out loud. How did you envisage, when you were writing it, did you imagine this will become a production, this will become adapted?
I never did. I never dare when I'm writing a book. I just want I just have the reader in my mind's eye and mind's ear. So I'm sort of having a conversation with imaginary readers, and I have a gallery. I don't know if this is true of most novelists, but I have about 5 people. One of them is an old English teacher. One of them is my mother. And then there are other people whose opinion I value, but not necessarily my closest friends. And I can almost catch their eye sometimes when I'm writing. And I hear some of them going, no, come on, Stephen, you can't do that. and I go, no, I'm going to surprise you. I know it sounds like genuinely batty, but it's not that big, it's not that writ large, but it's a sort of thing that goes on in my mind. But I don't picture it exactly as a film. I sort of daren't.
Okay.
And it's a whole new thing. And now, of course, if I do go back and read the book, I will hear the tones of Roger, and he's enriched it to me. He's made it better. It's a bit like Oscar Wilde said, Turner improved nature. Now you look at a sunset, and Turner has shown you a new way to look at it. And so you actually see it with new eyes, and that's what artists do, and that's what actors can do with the role. And actually, I saw Roger some years ago giving a stunning performance of Falstaff, and I realised that there is quite a lot of Falstaff in a way in that character too. Is one of the great English characters. I wouldn't dare suggest that I was doing as well as Shakespeare.
I think you just did.
I did, didn't I? I did, and then I tiptoed away.
It was very well done.
Just
wandered into the garden of comparing yourself to Shakespeare, and then just came out again.
I had my cake, ate it, and sneered.
But I think also, to go back about what you were saying about being a critic, I think that's what a good critic can do as well. Yeah. That can not necessarily improve on something, but certainly, as it were, help you see it, or hear it, or understand it, or read it.
But what Blanche and John have done is you see, because a novel is made of words and nothing else, but a screenplay is made of scenes and moments and characters and shots. And you had to, presumably you probably in the book found all kinds of structural flaws and thought, what have you done, Steve?
Not at all. For me, one of the terrifying challenge was how to take the brilliance of the writing, but also the descriptions and the different points of view of the various characters, and make that work in a screenplay, which, as you said before, enormous chunks of it are just visuals, an atmosphere, or a look, or a gesture.
Or backstory.
Exactly. Yeah. But how to... I'm trying now to think of a description without... something like, in Arcadia, conversation bounces like a punctured tennis ball on a peat bog. And it's wonderful. How do I put that into a script? I don't know.
Yeah. So when you, obviously, because the book is very complex, very rich, many characters, when you first, went towards it, how did you begin by paring that down? Did you plot it out? Do you do a graph? How do you do it?
Oh, it's so long ago now, I can barely remember. In fact, I remember sitting down to write the first draft as the Tories and the Lib Dems were sitting down to make their coalition agreement.
Wow.
So it's after a similar kind of amount of beating my face on the table, I came up with...
I remember when I kept watching an Oscar or a BAFTA ceremony or something when I was about 12, and seeing the producer taking his award and shaking it and going, 7 years in the making. And I remember thinking, oh, it's ridiculous. It doesn't take 7 years to make a film. And you've just shown that 7 years, you would have dreamt, you would have...
Yeah. What's extraordinary is 7 years to get to the point, and then we shot it in 23 days. It says, everyone goes, oh, how long did you take to film it? And you were sort of like, no, we ran straight through it, and we did, it was incredibly fast filming. And then, loads of time editing. But that, those 7 years building up to those 23 days.
But during the course of those 7 years, did it change shape?
Hugely. There were flashbacks to the whole of Albert's story. We thought we would make it one time, and then it became too expensive. What that required, going back into... Czechoslovakia, exactly. There was a whole the shooting expedition that was
with the petals coming out
at one point.
Of it. Yeah.
Exactly. So they were.
We did actually shoot that though. We did the thing where we shot petals into the air. It was amazing.
It's the thing I'd actually wanted to do when I was a boy. I grew up in the country and there was a lot of shooting, and there was a period I had, which I've never really grown out of, where I just thought it was nasty to shoot birds out of the sky. And I'd seen these strange brass things that you use to load a cartridge with shot. And I'd thought, wouldn't it be great to sneak down the stairs at night and open up all the cartridges and with one of these machines and pour out the shot and fill it with confetti. But enough charge, leave it, so that all these butch men in there, you know, whom I hated when I was a boy, in their tweeds, marching up and down with the beaters beating, the birds flying up and going, oh! And going poof like that, and then and that is the scene in the book. But
we filmed it.
Yeah, but it was crap.
it was great. It's one of those moments that you only discover takes the energy out of the story.
That's so true
when you're
in
and it's completely beautiful when you film it and you have all this confetti everywhere and it's dreamlike and you know you spent 3 days trying to get it the right time of day and then you just get in the room and you're watching it and you try and make it work for 3 weeks and then you're like, that's the problem with the film at the moment. This scene just sucks all the speed out of it.
And sometimes it's a very interesting thing in films. I did a thing with John Schlesinger, who's a fine director, and there was a scene, and we watched the film back, months and months, maybe a year later after, and someone in the cast said, "John, why did you cut that scene? We had such fun doing that." He said, "Yes, it was wonderful, perfect. God, you were good at it. It was a wonderful scene." We said, "Well, why did you cut it?" He said, "Well, it was an emotional repetition." What do you mean? He said, well, it was just saying the same thing that had been said in that scene where she snatches the kettle away from him. It was just doing the same job, telling you that she was annoyed. You didn't need to see it again. And that's a very important thing in films. You know, to have the courage, you'll know exactly what I mean, won't you? That suddenly you realize, actually, good as that is, we already know that. We don't need to see it again. It's indulgent to repeat it just because it's well acted and it looks good. We need to get to the next scene.
I mean, I think what I talked a lot about with my editor is what sometimes gets me into a script as the director, and I read a scene and I got into the film and with that one scene, but actually in the watching of it, that scene is the umbilical cord for the director, and that you need to cut it out. And you have the whole of the film that's perfectly formed in and of itself. That was the way that I got into it, and therefore I love that scene. But when it's actually gone, it doesn't.
And very often the opening scene is the one you think, oh, we don't need that anymore.
Yeah.
It's very common, isn't it?
Roger, Murder Your Little Darlings.
Murder Your Little Darlings, exactly. Yeah. One of the things that the great joys of the film is that you have this dialogue, much of which is very, bilious, beautifully written, very aggressive, and you do seem to take huge pleasure in those sort of torrents of beautifully well-written abuse. Was it as much fun to do that as it looks like?
Yes. It's interesting. I mean, playing Falstaff was extremely good preparation for this because, Falstaff talks endlessly, and Falstaff also doesn't know quite what he's going to say at the end of a sentence when he's started. He makes it up as he goes along, And that was tremendously useful, and a lot of my work in Shakespeare and work in the theatre was very, very useful for doing this kind of text.
Do you have to like the character to play them well? I mean, obviously, you find things that you sympathise with, but when we first meet him, he is a gloriously unlikable character.
Well, I just instantly loved him. I mean, that's the contradictory thing, isn't it, really? I mean, he's not a very lovable human being, certainly to begin with, but he's an incredibly attractive character to play, saying all those extreme things. You think, yes, I want to do that. Drunk, yes. Fat suit, brilliant.
Falling in the water?
Oh.
The falling in that can't be. Filming falling in a pond cannot be fun under any circumstances at all.
No, that's true. Luckily, I didn't fall in the pond, but I did have to come out of it.
Right. Blanche, when you watch the film, do you laugh at it?
I did, but also the lucky thing for me was that Tom Hodgson, the other writer, put in a whole load of jokes that I had no idea about. So I watched it go, oh, that's great, I wish I'd written that. It's fantastic. More like that, please, Tom. So it was lovely. My role very much was to do the first bit of it, to try to take the book and try to shape it into something that would honour what Stephen had written, but at the same time have that fantastic, propulsive plot that John was talking about. And so the actual speakability came very late and wasn't mine.
Okay.
So I was delighted to see how funny it was, partly because no one knows what the mix is.
Due to the miracle of social networking, which we were talking about earlier on, we have some questions from Twitter, your favourite.
Hey.
So this is for Stephen and John. This is from Nissi. Have you ever thought about making a sequel to this book or film? And if so, what would you like Ted to investigate next?
Given that you've got these written down, I wish I'd had a look at them before.
Well, personally, I am fond enough of Ted as a character to at least imagine the idea of putting him in another situation. I mean, you know, it is, in a sense, a play on the classic country house mystery, you know, detective story. So there is no reason why he wouldn't go to another place to do that. So, yeah, I wouldn't, you know, other books I've written I couldn't possibly imagine, but this, I could at least imagine it. I could entertain the idea.
I imagine a wonderful television series.
Would we
a private eye who's also a poet? Perfect.
Will we have
somewhere exotic? I don't know, Rome.
Will we have
travels around the world to poetry festivals?
Would we have to kill off Inspector Thursday first? No, exactly. See, very, too beloved.
Right, Roger, this is for you. This is from Hedgehog Loves, at Hedgehog Loves. Which was the most difficult line to deliver?
Ooh. Oh, well, I can't remember any of them now. I can't remember. I don't think any of them. I didn't find any of the lines difficult. Oh, I think there was one. There was a speech. There was a speech about. I hope the watching world can cope with this. About turning masturbation into kind of something hand cream or something like that.
Oh yes, around the
fire when I just come out.
And there were airplanes circulating when we.
I found that quite difficult to say. I suppose.
Yeah.
I can't remember why.
Okay, this is for Stephen. This is from Rachel Brock. If you were to write The Hippopotamus now, the novel, I imagine, what, if any, changes would you make to it? Because obviously the novel is, you know, it's some years old.
It is, and that's a very interesting question. And it's so, you know, could I, you know, have the same energy, the same things I wanted to say in the same way now that I did then? I mean, I don't dissociate myself from any of the book, but it would be different, and it's, you know, Heraclitus said you can't step into the same river twice because fresh water is always flowing past you, and you know, that's just true. I am a different person. I'm probably molecularly different in every degree, but I suppose obviously one clear fact is that Ted is a bit of a technophobe, and in the book he's having to send faxes and things which now look very sort of quaint and archaic. Yeah. So there'd be a difference in that, just the technical side of things. But I'd like to think it would be pretty similar, to be honest. There's no actual main shape that I would alter.
I'm going to ask you one last thing from Twitter before we take questions from the audience. This is a lengthy question. This is from Dr. Christian Jessen. Never has science and discovery been so mistrusted, and you spoke about Roger's character being a technophobe. What can we all do to help rectify this and tackle the dangerous anti-science, chemtrail, anti-GM? It's all a cover-up by the big pharma crowd. Less, what would Jesus do? And more, what would Ted do? How do you feel about that?
Well, it's true, and it's an interesting thing to me that poetry and science in that sense are connected. They're about investigating the reality of things, not how you want them to be, not fantasy, but reality. I suppose, to some extent, you could blame science for not presenting itself in its true colours, which are beautiful and mysterious and simply thrilling. But you know, the fact is some great scientists have shown that. Richard Feynman is an obvious example, and plenty of contemporary ones who make science the greatest adventure there is and the most emotionally compelling. The thing about chemtrails and everything else is that they're a dead end and they're dull. You know, these, you know, absurd, ignorant in the sense of just not, you know, not fully thought through and understood you know, fantasies about how the world, you know, people wish the world were rather than the way it is.
Yes.
the way the world is so fantastic. The idea that you want it to be something else, or you're trying to suggest it's something else, seems very odd. I suppose curiosity is the answer. I think Ted is he's curious about things. He knows about things without, he doesn't want to, he will use shocking language. He said, I don't want to wank on about this, he will say, because he doesn't want to sound too kind of cutesy. But the fact is, the world is a terrific adventure, and science is the best route to it, and so is poetry. The two are absolutely linked. What's a pity is I don't know, is not having that excitement about that curiosity. You spoke about kindness, and I'd say curiosity is another.
There's a line in the film which I think we added at some point, which was miracles are what we say is what's happening when we're either too frightened or too lazy to work out what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to what you're saying there. When you start saying that it's this small explanation that you don't want to investigate and you've kind of given up, that's when you start using words like miracles or start inventing chemtrails or all these kind of things. You've got to keep that curiosity, that drive in investigation and working it out for yourselves, which unfortunately is a lot of what people who believe in chemtrails say they're doing. They've seen something and they feel that they've investigated, but they haven't.
The last thing from me before this, were you at any point worried that any of the subjects you were touching upon would be controversial in the film? I mean, the film is, it's light and funny, but it is dealing with things which absolutely push people's buttons.
Yeah, that's true.
I think that was the point. That's what we were trying to do.
Yeah.
I was trying to have something that on one level felt like perfect Sunday afternoon TV, and at the other level was, dealt with all these themes that are totally out there.
Tea time slot.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's what I had in mind.
It's Antiques Roadshow or the hippopotamus.
People might not be able to look at Horse of the Year showing quite if they happen to have seen the film or read the book.
But was there anything? I mean, did you censor yourself at all? Is there anything that you thought we're not going to do that in the film?
There was one thing that I remember that in the book, David is 15. And we needed, I think, to blur his age, because if he had been underage, the things that he gets up to and what happens to him would have been very...
Even though he's...
We made him, he says he's 16 in the
Yes.
film, and that was really important. And I think that kind of stuff you can get away when you're writing a novel, but in the film, when you're showing it to people,
It would have felt like a much...
Really would have been,
much harder to swallow.
Oh.
Hey.
Oh dear.
Are we happy to take questions from the audience? Probably bring the house lights up so we can see. So if you have a question, stick your hand in the air. We will run a microphone to you. So, yes, there, gentleman in the green shirt.
Hello there. Mark, one of the great joys of Hay is that it's sodding miles away from London, and that means we get to listen to you on a Friday afternoon. On a Friday afternoon, this Friday, you said that a comedy film no longer has to have 6 laughs, it has to have considerably more than that. Is this a comedy film?
Whoa. It is, and very specifically, I mean, what was interesting is you saw the trailer that we played here, and I counted 3 big laughs in that trailer. Then we played the clip of Roger berating the theatrical production. And just to be clear about the 6 laugh thing, that started because I had seen so many comedies that literally were not funny ever. And I said, I think for something to be defined as a comedy, it has to make you laugh a minimum of 6 times. Otherwise, it isn't a comedy. It is something else that, And then this then became, Kermode's 6 laugh rule. What was staggering was firstly how few films... I mean, I saw so many comedies in which I would just sit... I know I've got a tin ear for comedy. I have. It's been said before. But I would sit there stony-faced thinking, a joke would be nice. And I think there's absolutely no question in the case of the hippopotamus, even with, because somebody wrote in and said we should raise it to 10. I mean, obviously you understand that this is a ridiculous, I don't actually think that things can be judged by how many times you laugh, but yes, it did pass the 6 and 10 laugh test without any problems whatsoever, so congratulations.
We did it.
You also have a rule, don't you have a rule that no film on a bus that's advertised on a
The
bus?
film was advertised on the side of a bus, yes.
Is any good?
That was like the old one about anything that had Matthew McConaughey leaning against something. Was not good.
So true.
And it was just like literally every film he made until Dallas Buyers Club, he was leaning against something as if to say, I'm not here. I wish I was somewhere else. Question here.
Hiya.
Hello.
In the BBC series Radio 4, Cabin Pressure, the character of Stephanie Cole once described your character, Roger, as sounding like Stephen Fry's favourite uncle. And I thought you were absolutely brilliant at it. But Stephen, did you at any point imagine yourself playing Ted in this film?
Not really. I think I would have, if someone had asked me, if John had said, you know, we'd like you to play Ted, I would have felt very resistant about it because I so wanted John and Blanche and all the filmmaking team to be absolutely free to make the film they wanted to make, and I thought they'd be inhibited if I was doing it. And as soon as I knew Roger was doing it, I felt completely at ease. I just knew he was so right for it in every respect. Timbre of voice, body, hair, eyes, chin. I mean,
he had all of them.
It's just unbelievable. Yes, he had them all. And they were all in the right place. So, yeah, my favourite uncle is exactly right. That's a perfect description.
Roger, how do you feel about that description?
Well, of course, I was playing a character. No, I mean, I mean, just to say in return that I very much heard Stephen's voice in the writing, and so, you know, that's a kind of marriage, which, of course, is another thing that a comedy could be in the classical sense, isn't it? That it just ends with a marriage.
Yes.
So it could have no laughs whatsoever, but as long as it ends in a marriage, that could, in classical terms, be a comedy.
Yeah.
Not very funny, though.
Exactly. I think if you put that on the poster, it ends in a marriage. It wouldn't work. Okay, let's take another. Let's take in the middle there, lady with glasses on her head. I say that as opposed to glasses on your face, on your...
Yes.
Thank you so much for such a great talk this evening. I just wanted to ask you, Stephen, with Hippopotamus having one of the key themes of miracles, will this film pass the blasphemy laws in Ireland?
Well, yes, I mean, thank goodness I'm here. I could so easily have been imprisoned at this today if things had gone against me. It's... For those who are not aware, I did an interview a year and a half ago in which I was asked about, you know, I just asked what I would say to God if God really did exist, and I suddenly found to my surprise that I was facing him after my life. What would I say to him? And I said what I'd say, and it's not exactly an original idea, but I'd said that I would have, you know, said, what the hell were you thinking of? You know, I would have been quite cross with him. Anyway, the interview went on, and people at the time were interested or cross or whatever. But for some reason, recently, they went to the police and lodged a complaint and said that that I was blasphemous. So it's quite possible I would have gone to prison. But Ireland is Ireland. Don't forget that. At any point, I was contacted by the man who framed this blasphemy law, actually. It's called Dermot Ahern. And Ireland had a previous blasphemy law in the days when it was really pretty subject to the whims of the mother of all churches, and they wanted to get rid of it, but the Irish constitution was such they couldn't get rid of their blasphemy law without a very expensive and embarrassing and public referendum. So what they did instead was they retuned the law as it existed. And this man, Dermot, said, I'm so sorry if you feel you've been threatened by it, but I have to say, actually, I deliberately framed it so that it was unenforceable. And I think that's wonderfully Irish. It seems never in any way that there was even the faintest chance of my getting in prison. But no, the point about miracles is, you know, the risk of sounding very sententious, they are present every day. You know, I go for a walk in the morning every day, and particularly this time of year, every 5 yards I see a miracle, whether it's a tree breaking into bud or something else. It's just something quite miraculous about the world in which we live. And to say everything is a miracle, you might argue also means nothing is a miracle, because everything is... But what else could a miracle be? If a tree suddenly started speaking to me, it would just be... That wouldn't be a miracle. It would be just a mistake, and it would be wrong and upsetting, and I would want to wake up.
You should have felt like the Tolkien, you know, that tree's talking to each other. Yeah. That's just a mistake.
Stop it. Pull yourself together.
We have about 5 minutes, so I just want to take a couple more questions. Over there, gentleman with the blue shirt.
Hi, I've just got a question for John, director. Stephen talks about the freedom that he gave you. How much of that was a relief or an added pressure?
It was an instant and great relief. And I really felt that, you know, once we'd been handed something and we just had to get on with it. And it's the only time I ever felt any pressure from Stephen was when I went to Los Angeles and Stephen went and saw it for the first time, and he sat in the front and let everyone else in the theatre leave before he stood up, and then stood up and walked the long way up to where I was standing at the back. And I felt quite a lot of pressure.
I didn't know that. Oh, my God, I'm sorry.
And then you did this, you did a very British thing. You were about to give me a hug, and then you shook my hand. And I was like, oh, my God. 7 years of pressure in one gesture. And then you said you liked it. It was fine.
Oh, yeah.
But that was I didn't feel any pressure.
So for 7 years, you literally hadn't shown anything to Stephen?
We hadn't really.
No, I'd sort of said, please don't make it. You know, make it your own. Films are, you know, it's an old debate, but films belong to directors really, and yes, screenplay writers too. But you know, they are the director's medium, and if you take extreme examples, very few people are going to say, gosh, well done, Mario Puzo on The Godfather. It's Francis Ford Coppola's film, and it should be, and he made it, and it's John Jenks's film, this, not mine. Mine might have been the source material, but this is very much your film, and Blanche's film, and Roger's film, all the filmmakers' film, not mine. It was just one element of it, and I wouldn't want my name overused in it. It wouldn't be fair to you, and it would be, a bad piece of marketing, and it would be a wrong thing. So,
let's try and get one last question in while we have 3 minutes left. Hand up, anybody? Yes, there. Thank you.
Stephen, you've described Ted as a Falstaffian character who sort of speaks very voluminously, but I think you endowed him with much more nuance and humanity. Was that a conscious effort? Because often critics and poets have a holier-than-thou perception.
Yeah, well, I'm very glad you saw that he is, I think, very tenderly of him. He hides behind the muscularity and elasticity of his language. The fact is he will go for a very crunchy Anglo-Saxon idiolect, if you want to call it that, almost hiding the tenderness of his soul, if you like, which is that of a true poet. But he's annoyed with the world, because the world seems to him to have just lost its values, and he doesn't want to express them in hideous hippie new age ways. He doesn't want to express it in ways that are cheap and easy and clichéic, because for a poet, cliché is the enemy of poetry. You know, you have to reinvent, T.S. Eliot called it, you have to purify the language of the tribe. If you're a musician, you can go to a music store and buy special instruments made of brass and wood, and you can use a language of diminished sevenths and G sevenths and C minors, and it's a special language. If you're a painter, you have acrylics, and you have sable and hog's hair, and you have turpentine and linseed and canvas and special reserved materials to make your paints. If you're a poet, you have the same thing I'm using now, the same thing someone uses to say, I hate you, or to order pizza online, or to, just to say, where's the nearest toilet? It's just they have nothing else but language. And so they have to make it very special. And they hate the misuse of it. They hate the underestimation of language. And Ted uses language in a way that it seems vulgar to prissy people, but he's trying to make them listen all the time, and it matters. And ultimately it's a service, and it is, as you say, kind, and that's what I love about Ted, I think.
Our time is at an end. I'd like to say thank you so much for everybody for coming along tonight. Thank you to everybody who's in one of the 120 cinemas that have played this around the country and have taken part in this Q&A. Please join me in thanking John, Blanche, Roger, and Stephen.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, my friend. you. Thank you so much. Thank you. That was fun. Well done, you. You're very good at this. Very good. You really are.
29 seconds to spare.
And please go and see the film.